Viewer, welcome to what is going to be episode 47 of Connection Over Coffee. And I have the ever awesome, spectacularly just brilliant Craig Cassey, who is normally in DC, but finds himself in a hotel room in Minneapolis at tonight. I kind of want to say Minnesota, kind of like someone out of Fargo.
I mean, it's not the most exotic location, but the people are friendly and the food's amazing. But as you know, Phil, I am from DC. I'm looking at moving to a few different places in the world, but my boyfriend who's sitting right behind me, he got a job here. So we're now exploring what creating a life in Minneapolis could look like.
Excellent. I'm all for exploring random cities of the Midwest of the US. And I hear there's just lots of lakes and a very big mall.
Huge, massive.
Yes. Well, you move to Minneapolis, you'll become a mall rat. So there's something for you.
We'll figure it out. I think I'm more I'm a water baby through and through. So give me the sun and the sunshine. And when it goes negative 30 degrees, I will be finding my way down to Mexico instead.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. All right. So let's get going on this. So Craig Cassey, welcome to Connection Over Coffee. It's brilliant to have you here.
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
I know, but the best things take a while.
I'm grateful. I'm excited for our conversation today for sure.
And including sometimes the internet connection takes a while too. So apparently that's really good. Craig, I want to just jump straight on into this chat. And as we know, this comes on the back of the blog post that you wrote that I published last Thursday, which is on the loneliness of success. And I want to first start, before I jump all the way into that, I always do this. I'm so keen to get into the chat, into the good stuff, just in case someone doesn't know who Craig Cassey is, just in case. Could you please elaborate, introduce yourself, say some fun facts?
Oh, fun facts. I'll start with what I do for a living. So everyone, if we have not met yet on Instagram or YouTube or elsewhere in the world, I'm Craig Cassey. I happen to be an intuitive executive life, business, and sex coach. That's D, all the above. So from the boardroom to the bedroom, my clients come to me because they're ready of actually having a life that doesn't just look like success by the standards of society, but one that feels pleasurable and tastes like success in every way. And that means in their intimate life, that means in the experiences they cultivate in the world, that means no longer saying yes to the bullshit and only saying yes to what fulfills them. So my favorite conversations are all about getting what you want and feeling damn good about doing so, no matter what anybody else says.
I love it. I'm all for those kind of, I want to say alliteration, like boardroom to bedroom. You had me at that. That was just that was awesome. And the other one that I particularly like, and I feel when we are experiencing loneliness and we are subjecting ourselves to the narratives that often play out in our head that sort of make us feel pretty shit, make us feel question our worth, our worthiness of love and belonging. And oftentimes kind of a rubber band snapping on a wrist. We need to call bullshit on those stories because they are bullshit. And sometimes kindly, lovingly, bullshit needs to be called. Kindly, lovingly, directly, bullshit needs to be called.
and often. I don't think we
Yes.
realize, I don't think I even realize, this is like a personal thing for everyone, how often I like drink or drink my own
Oh, the
from
internet connection. So
family.
yeah.
That bit if you want. So I think this goes for everybody. But like I don't think I'm even fully aware of how much of my own bullshit I drink. And
Yes.
the bullshit's just get from other people, from family, from societies, but like it is such a regular practice for our brain chatter to feed us this BS that we think interruption looks like maybe once a week with a therapist or twice a week with a coach. But
Yeah.
in reality, it's an everyday practice of really leaning in and shutting it off all the time.
Yes. Yes. I'm quite known. Quite known. I'm known. I'm going to drop the moderator there in that sentence. But I'm known amongst my clients, and in the coaching that I do, as the person who pays attention to the words that we use. And the words that someone uses when describing something that's making them uncomfortable, or and how they use words when they're talking about something that lights them up. Words are words are words are words are words. What we say matters, how we use it matters, what words we use, what words we don't use, it all matters. And yeah, it is the frequent application of my finely honed bullshit meter that really can cut through, because I'm like, I don't know who you're telling that to convince, but you're not convincing me. Actually, the words that you're saying suggest completely the opposite. So how about you drop the mask, drop the facade, and let's have that conversation about what's there.
It's always a conversation, isn't it?
What's that?
It's always the juiciest conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And it's the conversation that we often fear most. And I know I get, really worried about it. However, it's the conversation that I have feared the most that actually was never as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'd made it up into something that was going to literally stop the Earth spinning on its axis, if I ever discovered that. And of course, it's never true, is it?
9 times out of 10, maybe more like 98 times out of 100. Ask my questions out all the time, just for shits and giggles. Because a lot of times we live in the fear and we don't even know what's reality or what's realistic anymore. It's a delusion. We're all delusional. It's part of the fun of being human. But like you can ask yourself, when anxiety or the doubt or the fear that keeps you in your comfort zone pops up, looking at your life in general, how often, 1 to 10, 1 being never, 10 being all the time, does life work out neutrally to positively compared to your anxiety and what it
Yeah.
suggests? And I've yet to ever meet anyone who says anything like 6 or below. Everyone's like, oh, 8, oh, 9 for sure. If you're batting 9 out of 10, you're better than any professional athlete in the world. Go back out there and swing again, because you're going to hit some balls that you need to.
Yeah. Oh, good sporting analogy. I feel that there's going to be a few of those coming up, given the nature of what you wrote about in your blog.
Probably.
So yeah. So listener, Craig is taking a big swig of water. I'm half expecting some Gatorade to come out and to keep him well hydrated. But
good for you. No Gatorade, pineapple juice maybe. If we had that in my hotel, I'd be all about the fresh squeezed juice. But I'm on a reduced sugar diet very happily these days.
And of course, I'm not endorsing any one particular product, but it is this is going to be a great conversation, because your blog introduces the concept of success for you as the high school athlete. And I want to, before we get into that kind of detail, I want to ask you, Craig, what was the experience like for you writing that blog post? Like,
Might have my friend instead, because he got to watch me write it across 10 days repeatedly.
So yeah, so it took you a little while.
Oh, it did. I mean, I have always enjoyed writing, but I think I shared with you the process before. It felt like it needed to be done and redone, and it wasn't for the sake of excellence. It was because every time I dove back in, I uncovered something else that A, was truthful and was honest. You know, I wasn't like uncovering anything that didn't have meaning or value for me, but there was just more to explore. It felt therapeutic. And honestly, it felt like therapy on its own, which I love free therapy, even though I believe in paying our professionals for sure. I'll take what I can get when I can. And I think it also really gave clarity to what I'm up to now, looking at, you know, I'm shifting from my home city of 10 years to a new city where I know 4 people potentially, or to a city across the world, much closer to you, Phil, where I know you and maybe 2 others. And loneliness as a topic, especially being a cause for my loneliness or my connection. This blog post really helped me explore how I'm going to do things differently now than how high school Craig or how college Craig approached his relationships and his relationship with loneliness.
So what was your biggest fear in like sitting down? I'm imagining, I don't know, like Carrie out of Sex and the City kind of thing, and you know, sitting at your desk. There's like, you know, a laptop open. There's a blank page and a blinking cursor. What's going through you at that point?
Where to start was the first question, because there's no one right way or no one ultimate like door to open. So real talk, I just gave myself 20 minutes to put anything down the paper that came out and not make any of it wrong, because I am a perfectionist through and through. I'm learning how to put down that tool. I'm healing that, but I'm not healed. So I give myself a lot of space just to be messy and get it out. So the first thing was where to start. But the second thing too is, as a coach, I imagine you totally can get this. When you wear a hat where you're both a professional and an expert, and then you're opening up about being in process, about being in process, like being in transition, not being fully cooked, not being at the finish line yet. The fears that pop up, even if I don't hold them to be true, they sound like, who am I to be writing this, or who am I to be doing the work while I'm still on the journey, as if the journey is ever going to end. And that is one of my defenses when it comes to my own vulnerability. Like the fork in my road is be authentic and vulnerable, or be performative and perfect and excellent, is like the false story that I run into a lot when it comes to being open and honest and vulnerable. So that's the story that fuels that pivot to the left. I should be already on the other side of this and talking from the finish line, or I could put that down and just talk about where I've been and where I'm at today and let it be.
It almost feels like be coach, be the instructor, be the do it this way, that way, think of things like this, think of things like that, or be a fellow human. And I think for me, at least, it is always both infinitely more powerful and infinitely more terrifying to go right, to be human. Particularly when, like you, although you didn't say these words, but I picked up on it, a reforming perfectionist.
I would agree. I wouldn't challenge that.
And so when you know, one thing that we all need to keep in mind, I wanted to say here, is that perfectionism is, and it kind of, perfectionism is something that's eminently relatable. However, it kind of can be, because it's eminently relatable, we can sort of throw it around, like bandy it around. But perfectionism is like has a 6-lane freeway connection to a source of shame. And it speaks to the fear of judgment. And something that we need to explore when it comes to sitting with our loneliness and having the blank page, because Phil has said, Craig, how about you write of your experience of loneliness? Thanks. And, take it where you want to, like, see what comes up. And you're sitting there, Carrie Bradshaw style, with the white screen and the blinking cursor and going, fork in the road.
I would have missed my deadline if I was Carrie Bradshaw. I will say that. And I'm happy that I kept on writing regardless. But it's not, I think that what you said is right. Perfectionism, it is to me a defense mechanism against shame that is inspired by shame.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a contraption, right? The goal of being perfect is to never be judged or seen in your full humanity. Because there's no perfection. We're not perfect, in any means whatsoever. But my perfectionism was a means for me to achieve love and affirmation and safety. Because like I wrote, as a premier track athlete, like no one's going to beat up the gay kid who is winning state medals and, bring home some trophy hardware for the rest of the students. But it also made winning feel really heavy, because the permission I gave myself to be as an athlete was very narrow. It was either I was number one or I was failing. And even when I was number one, it grew into I had to always be at my personal best and like continue to hyperachieve, which that is not sustainable in any means. No wonder I got injured. But apply that to your social life, and what happens? Like, people would say that they really liked me, they were fond of me, but I never got the sense that I was ever like known fully, or that I was seen until years of college.
And so I'm curious, like, is that known beyond essentially like, your name? Like, known as in who you really are?
For everything. So I don't think I wrote about this in my blog post, but I grew up super waspy, so super religious household. Basically, if you felt anything negative or you felt bad, you didn't share it. Maybe you talked to your family about it, maybe, but even then there was a line you drew, and we say, okay, now this is between you and God, and He'll take care of it. So one thing I had to really learn was that if I wanted to actually have relationships and be in connection and to not feel like myself, it would take people.
Oh, you're just dropping out.
Hearing things like sharing your hopes. Oh, we'll go right back. When did I drop out?
Yeah. So, super waspy. Anything like there was a point that between you and God, like there was a point that, humans couldn't help. You needed to sort of be in communion with God, and He'd fix it.
Got it. And then exactly. And I think that's personally bullshit. We're designed to be communal people, right?
Yeah.
I believe in having conversations with the spirit, totally. But that was a way of spiritually bypassing, processing my negative or even positive feelings and letting that be an experience that was just an expression of myself. So, my perfectionism prevented me from being fully expressed. And therefore, people didn't.
Oh, no. Internet.
Oh, up again.
Yeah. So people
Hold on one
didn't
second.
need to be. Yeah.
Eric, would you be able to call down to the front desk and see if there's a different Wi-Fi that I can hop on that would be stronger? We can problem solve and process for this. Wi-Fi is not perfect, neither am I. But boyfriend in the background is going to figure out technology issues.
Excellent.
If we need to record, we can always re-record too, and I'm happy to hop on Zoom and do this again with.
Yep.
You're good, babe. There's no rush.
Yeah.
Keep going or pause for right now. What you want to do?
Let's keep going, and we'll see where this takes us.
Cool.
But one of the things there, and I want to go back a moment just to that, you know, to the writing it down as therapy.
Oh yes, I'm in room 335. I'm in trouble with the Wi-Fi. What's the Wi-Fi access?
If you're listening, that is the sexy and smooth stylistic voice of my partner in the background, fixing the Wi-Fi.
I love this. I'm going to keep this in. This is like real. I'm all for authentic connection.
It's real life. This is what happens when you go to University Hotel in Minneapolis.
Graduate guest.
All right, we're gonna change this real fast.
All right. I'll press pause on the recording. The recording is back on. It feels like, you know, what was it, Wayne's World? Where they were like, you know, game on. So yeah, there's a blast from my 90s past. So yeah, sort of exploring the sort of therapeutic nature of sitting with your loneliness and writing about it. Keen to unpack that a little, because it speaks to the fear that we can have when we strip everything away. We're no longer allowing that which we've wanted to numb or avoid. We've taken all of that away, and it's just you, what you're feeling, the keyboard, and the screen. And we can resist that. So that's why I want to come back to this, and I want to really pay attention to it, because I feel that your insight can really help the viewer, listener, more than me banging on about it, because I bang on about it all the time, right? And I'm happy to bang on about it, because that's the fork in the road where we get to make a decision. Do we show up for ourselves or not? But I'm really keen to see what your experience, how that can help the viewer, the listener who is really reluctant to sit with their loneliness.
Got it. Well, I'll out myself as I have a fetish for buying journals and telling myself that I will write and reflect on them, and then never doing so. I have a lot of very beautiful journals staring back at me. And this experience is similar to that. And I think the reason why, you know, if you're listening to this, and if you've ever heard of attachment theory, I am on the side of the paradigm between secure and avoidant. And one of the qualities that I find true for many avoidances, we have difficulty sitting in any emotion for a long period of time. I say long, I mean a medium to slightly longer than a short period of time, for being honest and transparent. So part of my healing work has really been just dropping down and asking myself questions that sound really basic, but that actually really uncover my reality, so that I no longer fear that kind of emotional, I don't know if it's like awareness or intimacy with myself, but even asking, you know, what do I fear? Or what fear might I be experiencing today? Or what hopes do I have that are yet to be expressed?
Yeah.
Like, these are part of my practice right now. So the loneliness thing felt like that, in all honesty. The choice to sit with what was and what is, and also to flesh it out, because as a slightly avoidant human being, it's like I see the first page of a book, but sometimes I don't read what's on page 2, 3 through 85. And it's essential to read those pages too, because until you do, you can't do the work.
Yeah. Yes. Something that I really want to zero in on, and is the allowance there of what is to be. And the gramophile in me like loves that language. I love that language. It allows what is to be. It allows it to exist because it exists anyway, whether you allow it or not. However, at that point, we can linger and get into the shoulds. I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I have this job, I have, this partner, these partners, I have this income, I've got this car, I live in this area, I holiday in this place, I have these hopes, dreams, and aspirations. I shouldn't feel this way. Now, if that doesn't mean, if that's not a series of thoughts that requires the consistent and steady and loud calling of bullshit, I really don't know what is. Because when we live in the shoulds, and hi, I'm a recovering perfectionist and a recovering shoulder. And the should kept me in my loneliness for far longer than it really needed to on reflection. And the shoulds are particularly effective at denying yourself. Denying what is to be. So Craig, I want to say this, and I say this very frequently to my clients. And I want to say this to you. You did a very courageous thing. And courage always needs to be celebrated and acknowledged for exactly that. And it's very easy to go, it was nothing. It was nothing, and particularly if we're a reforming perfectionist. Because we can never allow ourselves, because it wasn't perfect, we can never allow ourselves to receive the compliment. You did it. It's a beautiful piece of writing.
I like it, even though it wasn't perfect. But actually, I think one of the greatest gifts of being 4 years into coaching work now on the receiving end as a client, I've got my own coaches. I have since the beginning is I now practice like soaking in acknowledgement and in compliment.
Yep.
And it's funny because I used to get complimented all the time, and it wouldn't mean shit.
Yeah.
Like they'd bounce right off of me, and I'd still just be in my head, probably operating from the land of should. By the way, I've never heard a should that was created by ourselves or a divine entity. I've never had a should from spirit, besides maybe like, listen and go in this direction. Every should I've ever heard has always been from either family or some, I don't know, experience or social entity in the world. And as soon as you realize, for me, the lesson was, as soon as I realized that all my brain chatter was like a pile of magazine clippings being repeated from the time I was young, I got to put down the magazine and check out for what's actually there. And the thing about shame is it prevents desire too.
Yes.
It oftentimes blocks us from sitting with desire. And one of my greatest desires in high school was to not be so lonely. There was a time in my life when I would lay in bed, and we call loneliness a feeling and an experience, but it has physical manifestations. And I still remember high school Craig, before I came out, my gut was just so in pain. My heart was just so tight. And it felt unbearable. My dad even walked in on me. It sounds like I'm, being caught jerking off, but no, he caught in on me when I was like basically in a fetal position in my bed, because I was just so overtaken by the fear of never being able to connect the way that I wanted to or have a relationship.
Yeah.
And when he asked me what was wrong, I didn't even feel like I had permission to give him the truth. So that was a real powerful moment in my life where I realized that this was not a small feeling, and it also wasn't a way that I could keep living. I was forced to sit with, I think, a feeling that I had been avoiding for a while. That's the beauty of like physical manifestations. Your body really wants you to sit with an emotion, to be with it so that you can do something. And I was really forced in that moment to actually do something different.
That's really Thank you for sharing that. I want to acknowledge that. We all have that kind of almost rock bottom. And we are really good. I am really good. Craig, you're human too, so you're really good at this. I often bring the distinction between heart and head. Loneliness is in the heart. And as kids, we evolve, like we live in our heart. And then after that, like, you know, teenagers, and we want to be accepted, we want to fit in, like we develop the brain. And then the brain from there, like, starts taking over, and we can reason away using our brains what we suspect might be happening in our hearts. And we can live in the land of should forever. Well, think we can. But in the battle between our brain and our heart, our head and our heart, the heart always wins. The heart always wins. And when we sort of hit rock bottom, which is a concept that I explored with Matthew Todd a few episodes ago, who wrote Straight Jacket, Overcoming Society's Gay Shame. And when we hit rock bottom, we end up like reckoning with our heart. When we allow what is to be. And then from there, we can then, you know, build up our, build up on stronger foundations, actual real foundations. The problem is, we generally want to wait until it's rock bottom, and it never has to be that way. We can choose, I can choose, you can choose, viewer, listener, Craig, you choose when you want to throw the anchor out and go, all right, that's enough of a descent. All right, what am I trying to tell myself? And sit with it and allow what is to be. And so I just want to share this before I move topic. I want to share this. I get people reaching out to me frequently, and they're at their rock bottom. And they're like, shit, you're like, I'm lonely, shit. Instagram, loneliness. Ah, the loneliness guy. Oh, gay loneliness, right. And then I get this vomit of their story. And it is always a privilege to hear the story, but they're just like, this is my entire experience. This is how I'm feeling. These are the first times I've ever said this. What do I do? Go. It's like, first of all, stop looking for the quick answer, because there's no quick answer to loneliness. It's a practice. Connection is a practice that you have to choose. And you've got some work to do. No one likes to hear that, though. It's like, take this herb, have this vitamin, eat this food, jump up and down on one leg, like hop on the spot. No, never works that way.
Hey, your garden doesn't grow overnight either.
Love it. Love it. As I'm looking at our garden here in spring, in about to bloom, that's very, very apt. Craig, one of the things that you were talking about that you wrote about in the blog post, and I want to explore this because, as I said to you offline, this is, I think, a cultural difference between Australians and Kiwis and Americans, and the audience is pretty much like, you know, it's very spread around the world. So the audience for the loneliness guy, but there's a lot of Australians, there's a lot of Kiwis who may have read the blog post, and if you haven't read the blog post, you've got to read the blog post. Well, this will make a lot more sense. But part of the loneliness of success that you were describing was essentially allowing yourself to be really good as an athlete. And essentially like the in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was imagining like you training alone, away from the group of your friends, of the teammates, as a kind of way to hothouse your talent and to keep you up onto the next level. I'm just going to say this anyway. It's not going to come out how I want it to sound, but I'm going to say this anyway for the sake of, starting the conversation. That to me feels like a very American thing. And the Australian in me, which is a lot of me, but as an Australian who's lived overseas for a very long time and has an appreciation of how we see things as humans in lots of different ways, including being able to say loneliness and talk about loneliness in different languages in far more effective ways than English. But the Australian in me just went, ooh, like, ooh, tall poppy. And so when it comes to the loneliness of success, as you describe it, was the loneliness of success for you the loneliness of essentially being socially isolated from peers?
The physical reality, yeah. I mean, the truth is, if you saw me training, no one could keep up. And when they could keep up, it's because I was running slower, because I was over being by myself. And that also stunted my athletic development. And I knew it at the time. And I just didn't give a damn because I was tired of always being out in front without anyone to train with, without anyone to talk to, without anyone being able to relate to me. So it does sound super American. We're all about the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and become like the ultimate individual against all odds. Is a lot of what like our media, our cinematic stories that we share and repeat look like. But it's also the experience that we create. And for a lot of us, I think, for me, the experience was the people who I wanted to relate with or connect with. The only tools for connection I had back then were around similarities. I didn't know how to relate or connect in other areas that weren't just common interest. But when all of a sudden you're no longer sharing the same practice and you're no longer at the same events and you're no longer the same caliber, the similarities die off. And that is really what generated my sense of loneliness, because up until then, I hadn't really experienced it. I was always a great athlete, but I was still training with others. And as my expertise or my mastery grew, everybody else fell off. And then even people would reference me, but it was not as part of the we. I'd always be separate. And you hear that, and it's a compliment to an extent, because, it's true.
Yeah.
But it still creates a sense of separateness because it makes you less relatable at the same time.
Yeah. There's many similarities then with how you were feeling and what we describe as the tall poppy syndrome. And I was explaining this to you offline, and you may have heard it, in your work anyway, working with Australians and Kiwis and potentially Brits. But we walk this really, it's an impossible line. It's not a line. It's like it's so narrow and so thin that it basically cannot be seen with the naked eye. But we walk it anyway, where we want to be good at something, but we can't allow ourselves to be too good. And because if you make a mistake, which we're human, that's what we do, there's a crowd of people waiting for you to fall off your high horse. And then, yeah, that's what happens. You think you're too good, and so, public figures here in Australia, public figures in New Zealand, and New Zealand especially, like the rugby team, the All Blacks. It was really curious watching that as an observer in New Zealand for 3 years. like the whole country, 5 million people, is absolutely besotted like crazy for the All Blacks. And they're good. They're really good. That pains me as an Australian to say, but they're really good. But they're not allowed to be good. They're not allowed to be good. They're not allowed to own. And generally, I'm not allowed to own my success. Because after that success comes a downfall. And you hit upon this before. We want to numb the projected downfall by muting the success. So in the end, we feel nothing.
It's not very tasty, to be transparent.
No, but we do it all the time. And it feels to me, well, it feels to me that, like, you know, younger Craig, like, what was the event that you were like, were you a distance runner or a sprinter?
No, I was a very little sprinter, very fast. The wind blew and I basically blew with it. So I ran the 200, the 400 and the half mile.
Oh my. The 400 is like the most punishing sprint. That's not a sprint. That's like, yeah, that's anaerobic right there. Well done. And yeah, like what was it, a half mile?
Mm-hmm. Okay. We ran the half mile like a sprint as well. That was we just kept going faster. Okay. But, you know, interesting thing, I love what you mentioned about the tall poppy syndrome. And I think this is something that I've had to both learn to get over and learn to be with, because that risk never goes away. Like the brain chatter that I have, and anyone who I think is a perfectionist has, is when we do decide to stand tall, it's, am I going to be able to stand tall perfectly and not be knocked down or not fall down? And the reality is no, but that fear keeps you from something different from standing tall, rigidly, and perfectly in one line. I've yet to ever meet a plant that grew straight up.
Yeah.
Except for maybe a cactus. But we'll leave those aside. They grow in the direction of the sun. And when we look at what we're actually called to do, the sun shifts all the time. So do our desires, you know, within reason. The purpose of putting down that tall poppy syndrome is because the pleasure we feel from just growing is so much more rich and deeper and fulfilling than anything that comparison could possibly rob away. So it doesn't make it easy, because there is risk and vulnerability anytime we stick ourselves out above the crowd. Above is like the hierarchical placement. We have a tall poppy syndrome. It's others are here and I rise above. But if we change above to just expressed outward in any direction, sometimes you might be going lower in a different way. Maybe what your heart desires is actually to be a bit of a hermit for a few months. That's the anti-tall poppy, but it's what's authentic. Cool, do it. That also means when you do feel like sticking out, this is a place to lean in to desire that too. I think it requires, what I learned from high school track is it requires you to surround yourself with people who are of the same mindset, of the same experience, if we're going to relate over commonalities, or are open to being in relationship and championing you doing your own thing.
One thing that I want to, I really like, if I can underline that, highlight it, like consider it underlined and highlighted. But Craig, one of the things that I invite you to consider is the irony. I was on a podcast a few weeks ago, came out recently, and I was being interviewed, and I was called out on this, and this was very funny, but I'm like, oh yeah, this is really good. When I interview coaches, we and we, also in me, can tend to go into coaching mode and speak about something like in the third person or second or third person. But I invite you to sort of go back into that statement and put it in the first person in terms of the acceptance and essentially letting people, like allowing yourself to rise up and allowing you, as in like I as in you, to be seen and to level up and then level up in your life.
I will happily take another swing at it. And for the viewers too, I do this work for a living, and I'll just share, like, even your prompt right there, Phil. Yeah, I'm having a bodily reaction to it. And it's not a super strong one, but I can sense my body's resistance to being invited to pivot, to go back to the I, to go back to a more vulnerable statement. So if anyone at home is like, I'd be feeling some sort of way, I am too. And this is like part of the process. So I'll say this, I see so much value in being willing to stand up and to grow upwards or outwards in a way that is not what society thinks I should or ought to whatsoever. And there's still resistance to it. I think that's a part of growth and being seen and being vulnerable. As we heal, for me, as I heal, that's one of the tensions I feel a lot, is going back into the vulnerable and letting myself be seen in service of others sometimes, but mainly in service to myself too. I think for myself, a lot of the like enrollment I do around my vulnerability sometimes is as a gift to give other people. It's kind of like, how can I be vulnerable with a purpose for other people, which makes it about them and not me, as opposed to just letting myself be seen, period.
Yeah.
And then being with that limelight or that spotlight and practicing being okay with whatever comes. So you see me on Instagram all the time. You know, I'm launching this YouTube channel. I do a lot of public speaking and group work. And who knows what people say. I get DMs, I get feedback, largely positive. But the mind chatter, the brain chatter that I have every so often, if I'm dehydrated or tired or feeling especially perfectionistic that day, it goes into the, well, I wonder what. Or what if I post this thing that feels very authentic? How will it land? What will people think? So, you know, my own anti-poppy syndrome is one of reminding myself that that isn't what nourishes me. The clamping down on who I am doesn't nourish me. The spending my time watering fear and doubt doesn't nourish me. It never has. My brightest, most enjoyable moments are when I have seen those things, heard those voices, and then chosen differently. And each one of those times, yeah, and it's felt exhausting and exhilarating and terrifying and fun. But you know what the truth is? I feel the most alive in those moments. And I feel the most stagnant and stuck and dead inside. I mean, like, really neutrally lackluster when I'm unwilling to challenge those voices, or when I'm unwilling to grow in the way my heart desires.
Thank you. I want to particularly acknowledge and honor that you shared that while, like, after sharing that, that was tough. One of the things that I want to say here, I can't agree with you more. And I see your humanness, your gloriously weird and imperfect self. And like, I connect with that. Me too. And I feel you know, the listener, if they're listening to this on a train with headphones, they've yelled out, "Me too!" And everyone in the carriage is looking at them.
Share the download link with them. They deserve to hear this podcast.
Yeah, unplug the headphones. But I want to underline. I'm all about the stationery in this episode. You brought it up. You said you like nice notebooks. So I'm suddenly like all about the stationery supplies. Hey,
I love it. I do. I'm glad I can gift you that mentally or energetically right now. I'm gonna mail you a notebook. We're gonna have to actually use it though.
I know. Listener, I have a highlighter in my hand. But one of the things I was asked to speak about my loneliness experience, and a few weeks ago I shared that on socials, and you could go to a link on LinkedIn where what I spoke about. And the speech was at the launch. It was kind of a big deal. I didn't appreciate how much of a big deal it was until I was standing up in front of people, which otherwise I would have overthought it. I would have said no, or something, or I would have been far more nervous than I was. But I was asked to speak at Parliament House here in Canberra. So, like, depending on where you are, like, you know, if you're in the US, like the US Capitol, and to the Parliamentary Friends of Ending Loneliness Together. And Ending Loneliness Together is an umbrella charity here in Australia that is run by just an absolute dynamo, Michelle Lim. Hi, Michelle, if you're watching and listening. And who, like, Michelle is called as a clinical psychologist to actually end loneliness. And so I'm part of the Lived Experience Advisory Panel, which is a fancy way of saying, hi, I feel I get lonely. Like, and I'm exploring it. And there's me and a couple of other people who are just awesome. They're amazing. And I was asked to speak at it and to share my loneliness experience. And I did. And I was like halfway through the the talk. And I was like overcome with exhaustion. Like, I was absolutely spent. And I realized that in sharing my story, I need to be careful with that. My story fuels me, but it can also consume me. And in allowing that to be, like, I then got really sick. Like, the day after, I had no voice, and then I couldn't really get out of bed for a few days after that. And it was like I needed to care for myself. So, Craig, I'm going to say this. I feel that you already know this academically, but I want to remind you that in showing up and allowing yourself to be seen in this way, in allowing yourself to be authentic and to show up with, like, a beautiful, human, vulnerable way, we connect with you. But it's something that, you know, is special to you. So take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. You know, after this call, after, like, you know, and tomorrow, do something nice for yourself.
I want to do a lot of nice things for myself, but I do appreciate the reminder. I've got a lot of cuddles this evening. My boyfriend's letting me know they were in the future. A celebration after the podcast. You're recording during the day. I'm recording at 10:53 at night. So I have to clarify the reality. We stay up late anyways. But I will definitely do that. And I'll say this too. You know, I think the lesson I could have used when I was younger, when I first began to be vulnerable, like intentionally practice vulnerability, was to do just what you said, which is like have the bravery to actually be vulnerable and then also expect your body to have a reaction. I don't think we talk a lot about vulnerability hangovers, but they're a totally real thing. They happen a lot of times relationships, towards like a breakup, or when we're opening up about trauma or a kink or a desire. But there would be times when I would share, even my current partner during COVID, something that felt deeply vulnerable. And then I would not want to look at him for like half an hour. And that was my body's response. It was, you did the vulnerable thing, you connected, they saw you. Now go onto your side of the couch and pull back your feet from cuddling and wrap yourself in a blanket. And in that moment, my body was just saying, like, you really went somewhere, and your body just actually needs rest and some extra nourishment.
I would add, making a cushion or a pillow fort is always good too on the couch.
Oh, the size of our pillow fort with that couch cushion, I could house me and probably 2 friends.
It's a 3-bedroom fort. So
It'd be great.
The last thing that I want to get to, and you know, bearing in mind the time, and you're up way past my bedtime, is
Phil, we can go for a little while longer.
You said this beautiful, like you said words that had this beautiful imagery in me, where you were saying, you know, if you wanted someone to like run with you while you were training, you slowed yourself down. Because otherwise, the other choice was to not have someone to talk to or people to talk to. And I get that as teenagers, that's really important. That's really important to be part of something more than yourself. When it's, I describe this to my clients as, we often want to diminish the light within to make others feel more comfortable around us, because that diminishes the judgment that we fear. However, we pay a price for dimming our light, for hiding our light. And we need to let it shine, because that's what we're going to be doing anyway. We're going to try and be finding ways to let it shine, whether we dim it or not. So we might as well, you know, get out of our own ways. So I want to use that as the segue to a point that you raised in the blog post about releasing friends and choosing to not, or to no longer hold yourself back so you allow yourself to run with others, but rather choosing to run your, oh God, there's so many metaphors here, but choosing to run your race, letting your light shine. I'm just going to mix them all. And, you know, on your like training run, on your race, there's going to be packs of people that you catch up to and then overtake. And then the question is, or the topic that I want to explore now, is the releasing of people from your life. And you said it so beautiful. Like I was tearing up when I read it. And I remember just like, it got me right in the heart, got me right in the feels. And for me, speaking really personally, I have struggled at times to not imagine my friends as Pokemon, where I've got to collect them all and have them all. And if anyone sort of strays, then I'm like a sheepdog and like racing around to try and bring them back to the friendship pack. So I want to explore, how does it feel for you? Let's go to feelings. How does it feel for you to let someone go to allow yourself to be?
So this is not a one-size-fits-all answer or question. And I've experienced releasing friendships that are platonic and professional relationships and romantic one. And I think instead of going for commonalities, the emotions I experience are some are very easy. You know, I'm an Aries with a rising Leo. My boyfriend makes fun of me for being a super direct. Like when I've decided something or I felt the truth in my body, it can be very easy to just make a decision. And there are certain people who it's just very obvious for me that I'm no longer living in alignment with. Their actions, they don't match up with what I stand for. They're not who I want to be around, or energetically, they've been a bit of an energy vampire. And I've had conversations with friends to be like, this is not who you are. What's going on? And at a certain point, I felt very okay and emotionally untriggered just releasing them. But then there are others who, and I think for me, I've chosen to release with purpose. And sometimes I've just ignored a relationship to the point where it's been released. These are like the ways you can in a relationship. You can either like water the plant to make it grow. You can ignore the plant, in which case it dies. Not true in the end of that houseplant story. It's gonna die. Or you like kill it yourself. So for the friends though that I released by not watering our relationship, the emotions after the fact are typically ones of guilt around what could I have done to make it go better. And then eventually peace of mind that comes with realizing, well, maybe it wasn't on me to always determine the outcome of that relationship. And I usually have to do a gut check, which is, what was my truth here? You know, sometimes I really did just drop the ball and I fucked up. And that's why that ended, because they wanted a friend and I was busy living my life elsewhere. And other times it's just that we let go because we are living our truth. And subconsciously or intentionally, we create distance so that we no longer have to be challenged by the pain of being surrounded by people who are not in alignment with us. You know, I'm talking about how I feel after the fact, but when I'm right before I'm choosing to release people, I can tell you about that experience. It's frustrating. It's like being at a party and realizing I don't want to be here. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to have these conversations. I'm so much more fulfilled doing XYZ with these people. And even though I love y'all and we've been together, this is no longer doing it for me. And I'm doing us a disservice if I pretend that it is. And I'm doing us a disservice if I don't let you know that it's not. Because who knows what growth might come from both of us realizing, oh, maybe it's not working for them either. Maybe it actually could work differently for us. But if we never have that conversation, we're never going to find out. And that relationship we release could be for the best or could be a missed opportunity. So that's a lot of mixed answers wrapped in one. It's kind of a mixed bag of candy from the candy shop. But it's the truth is that there's not one way that I feel about this. And there's not one way that I've gone about it. It really is a wide array of experiences.
I'm totally okay with the whole mixing thing. Like you were party to, well, you were present when I was just mixing all of the metaphors ever. So, you know, I'm down for the mixing. When the viewer, when the listener is experiencing loneliness, has realized that they're lonely, that they're not feeling seen, they're not feeling heard, and they don't feel that they belong where they are. In a relationship, in a romantic relationship, in friendships, any kind of interaction with other humans, that can be really hard, like a really hard place to be. That point that you described there, Craig, sort of imminently before the releasing of someone. And you know, going back to that pot plant thing, you know, essentially like letting it die from neglect, then it's not my fault. Or indeed, this is a really good metaphor, I need to milk this more. We can overwater it because that plant is not flowering. So we like overwater it, we fertilize it and stuff. And that plant's like, okay, enough, let me be, and die.
So now you're to the anxious attachment boy in me.
Yeah.
That was people before college. I used to overwater my romantic relationships for fear of it not working out. And
Yeah.
like you said, yeah, eventually the flower speaks up and probably says, "What's going on? I can't handle this. Please stop."
Yeah. Like you're suffocating me. Yeah. That I want to say that that's an act of courage right there. Because the releasing of people from your life when experiencing loneliness is, well, hard, can be hard, but also is, and it can be like the words that are coming to mind here are like an investment into a future that can't be known. And it's a realization of worth. I'm worthy. Pardon?
So that hits home. That's relevant. That's
Yeah.
juicy.
How so?
Well, I think the line that comes up is you can't find the husband of your dreams if you're dating Mr. Wrong and choose not to break up with him. And I think one of my internal debates, I'm very happy with the boyfriend in the background, by the way. This is not the relevant part, but it speaks to the tension of striving for what you want or settling for what you have. And for those of us who are very adept at numbing, like myself, one of the challenges I run into is, am I numbing what's not savory about this experience sufficiently to be content with it? In which case, it's not for me still. It's just that I don't feel the enough to realize that it's not. And loneliness, for all that loneliness is, and all that it feels negative in many ways, loneliness is such an important experience to have as like a truth sayer in your relationship. Because if you've been numbing your own loneliness in your romantic relationship by working a lot, which I've got a lot of clients who do that, and we really work to open that up because that's not pleasurable, then actually having those brief moments when maybe you take a vacation together and you realize you do feel lonely, that's a gift. Because then you get to actually make the choice and say, hey, do we want to try to figure out what's underneath the loneliness and create real connection? Or is this my sign that I'm actually in a lonely relationship and it's not for me? And by the way, that's not an either or. I usually recommend try to explore it and express it and grow. But if you're taking the actions and you're still feeling lonely, that's probably your body's way of saying, hey, like, if you don't want to be lonely, this might not be for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And that's probably the hard part. The hard part is choosing, is the decision-making process of will I release this person or not? I find that once you've made the decision, the experience on the other side is usually, not always, but it's usually much easier. It's just when we hold back from making the decision that we sit in that difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I press pause for a moment?
Yeah.
Craig, one of the things just in your part, like in that immediate response, we're talking about, you know, the gift of loneliness. And the gift of loneliness is something that I've explored in previous content. Something in like, you know, December 2020, you know, like the Christmas edition of the Loneliness Guy. And the gift of loneliness is probably, you know, for many of us, the gift that's wrapped in shit that we've made maybe, you know, avoiding for a very long time. But it's there. It's there, and it's just going to be there until it's like unwrapped. And I say in my work that sitting with loneliness is kind of like opening Pandora's box. And, you know, it's seductive, but we mustn't, but we do. And then when we open it, all of this horrible stuff comes flying out. And we're consumed by the terrible stuff. But we forget that at the bottom of Pandora's box remains one thing. and that's hope. And loneliness, time and time and time again, in myself, in the work that I do for my clients and for the audience here, this constant reminder of the thing that we fear is actually the great source of hope. So what you're describing, or what you described there, was in the releasing of other people, in the releasing of what could be, what was, what should have been but wasn't, is the releasing of something to then position ourselves for what is going to happen next. And that's terrifying.
Can be.
Yeah.
Exhilarating might be another word for it.
Yeah.
You know, you might not see, if you're not watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, I was making a ton of faces as Phil spoke, because I think what is most powerful about that statement to me is the could be or the should be friends. It could be or the should be relationships. The ones we wish could go differently, perhaps, or we wonder why they didn't. And I really just think so many of our problems would dissolve away if we put down the shoulds around relationships and actually just checked in with what is and what are my desires and go from there. You know, my happiest relationships and my happiest friends, they perhaps did not come from a place of should, or they didn't match up with any form of should, but they were where my desire was at. And I felt nourished and I grew the most from them as a result.
I love it. The language nerd in me is like, put down the modal verbs, put them down, the coulds, the shoulds, the must, the mustn'ts, you know, the wills, the won'ts, like allow what is, live in the, like, make our language like in the present tense, first person.
The vulnerable, the most vulnerable, the first
most
person.
vulnerable of all the tenses.
Yeah. And this also means checking in with desire as if it isn't something logical. The shoulds you mentioned earlier, we've got the brain, the head space, and the heart space. Those shoulds all come from the brain. Desire all comes from the heart. And, you know, I think my brain is always trying to make sense of my heart or rationalize ways to protect my heart, hence the shoulds, the coulds, or the must be's. But if I just sit in desire, and that's my practice right now, that's how I help people, C-suite execs and all over the world, right? Learn to sit with their desire and their pleasure. All of a sudden, the thing that comes along with the Pandora's box of hope, I find is trust. That once you open it, yeah, there might be some stuff. I've yet to meet anyone that has a never-ending Pandora box of loneliness, by the way. It might seem that way. The same is true with anger. For those of us who resist anger, that was me. I have yet to meet a client who can just go for weeks on anger alone. So if you're resisting loneliness, just know your box is probably smaller than you think.
Oh, yeah.
Mine it was. But once you get to the hope, there's also that potential for trusting that things will work out. And that's why I think connection requires, especially in the dating world today, like the goal isn't to be liked when you're dating, it's to be seen and to be known. So that when you're known fully, you can either be told no because a person isn't for you, or told yes because the person really is for you. Mm-hmm. That is probably the game of loneliness too, because you could be liked as fuck and popular and hella lonely, or you can be seen and known and maybe not as liked, quote unquote, by as many people, but loved so deeply by the few. And that's really worth it.
Yeah. Anywhere we like, yeah, it's terrifying being seen and being heard for who you are in that moment, who I am in that moment, correcting my own language there, being seen and being heard for who I am in my own language, in my own, as being me in that moment is terrifying, but that's the way I get the feeling of belonging. And all humans, you, Craig, listener, viewer, Eric listening in the background, we all need to be seen and heard because we all need to feel that we belong. And that's connection. Connection to self, connection to those most important to us, and connection to community. The three pillars of connection. So, Craig, in wrapping this up, there's two things. You said that loneliness is a friend for you now. And I want to also sort of not necessarily explore that, but I want to know how you are relating to your loneliness now, having gone through the self-therapy of writing it down, which incidentally is the first thing that that clients do as part of the connection starter pack. It precedes our first call. This is I want to check in with you. I want to you haven't been struck by lightning. You haven't spontaneously combusted. So far as I can tell, how do you feel?
I feel good. As much as my body may have resisted writing down that story. Mind you, I did actually write 10 days in a row going back into it. So trust me, if you're debating whether or not to write your loneliness story, there's a lot of gold in there. Give it more than once over, please. I recommend it highly. But I think the way I feel right now about my loneliness is it's such a gateway for desire. And especially at this transitional stage of my life. I just hit 30. My business is thriving to the point where there's nowhere I have to be. It's all just where I want to be and what I choose to do nowadays, which is beautiful, but also requires me sitting with the question on the regular, what do I want? And I think loneliness is really giving me clarity on what it is I don't want. I love DC as a city and what my loneliness tells me as I go around town. And I'm not lonely socially there. I've got some amazing friends, but the city no longer feels like home. The city itself, there's a loneliness because my desire is so strong to be elsewhere. And so I'm really happy to have a chance to sit with the fact that what was a beautiful home and such a gooey, yummy one at that is no longer, because my desire knows there's a different home out there for it now. And loneliness is probably one of the first whiffs I caught of that. It smells like a city that feels stale, that no longer feels like a hug. And there's nothing bad with that. And nothing wrong even happened. Usually, and I'll say this to normalize it, I would be searching for what mistake I made or what went wrong. When I start to feel lonely, I'd be like, oh, I must have caused something, or oh, something must have happened.
Me too.
But now I just with curiosity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps we did, but also what else might it be showing me? So I'll also note that the one thing we didn't mention today is my loneliness back in high school was much of my own creation. And much like I find for many C-suite execs who are very successful, loneliness is not the way to get success. It's a way that we've learned to create success and maintain success. But it's also an illusion that we are lonely sometimes. So one of my practices on the door out of DC into whatever city is reminding myself that even while I feel loneliness because my desire is so strong to be in Melbourne or Minneapolis, is to also remain present to just how much connection I have. Because it's easy for me to take one part of my life and expand that emotion everywhere, even when it's not true. Ask my boyfriend. When I'm hangry, sometimes he thinks I'm mad at him. I'm not. I'm just hungry and emotional. But sometimes it gets a little messy. But it's true with others as well. Sometimes we're lonely in our relationship romantically. And for me, the times that's happened, sometimes I felt lonely amongst my friends. And that's not reality. It's just the projection. So I view loneliness much more as my friend now because it's given me some clear directions on where to go with life. And for that, I'm grateful. But I'm also really reminded that it is as much it is a door open, is also a mirror that doesn't need to be in every relationship. Now, even if it might be projected onto the others, it doesn't necessarily make it true. And that's for me to do a double check and a double look.
That's beautiful. I feel like a quote that I'll be lifting is, loneliness is giving you direction. Because all loneliness is your body's way, it's a signpost. It's your body's way of telling you that you're missing connection that you need. It's your body's way of getting your attention and saying, yep, you're missing something, spend a moment, what is it? Go do. The vulnerability, sure, but the vulnerability comes from the stories that we make that mean about ourselves.
Who wouldn't want another sign?
What's that?
Who wouldn't want another signpost?
I know, God, I've got all those, there's so many signposts in my life right now. It's like one of those, when you're at the bottom of the world or whatever, and like, it's got like Honolulu 4,000 Ks away or something like that. And you're just like, okay, like it's like Honolulu, Sydney, Singapore, whatever, is all these different directions. That's all the signposts that I have at the moment. Craig, in wrapping this up, where can people find you in case they don't know you? Where can they find you?
Certainly. So there are two main places and soon to be a third way to find me. I post almost every single day on the Instagram, as Phil can tell you. He's on my stories for that. I'm so grateful. But my Instagram is Craig Cassey Jr. That's CraigCasseyJr. For content all around building the relationships, the business, the yummy life that you want, and doing so driven by your own pleasure. The other option is my website, craigcassey.com. And soon you'll be able to see me regularly under the new branded web show called Coaching Naked, where we actually take off the shoulds that we've been wearing in service of you getting to live a raw, unadulterated life filled with pleasure. And if that sounds kinky and sexual, maybe that is for you, but it can also just be sweet and yummy in other ways. So those are the three places you can find me, and I'd love to connect.
Love it. I can attest, yes. Like I'm in awe of both your content and how you present your content. It's awesome. It's awesome. And I think I've shared this with you a couple of times that you tend to post like maybe an hour before I wake up. And so, I'd be having my morning coffee or something, and then like it's one of the first things that I see when I open things up. And it just often, just like wallops me around the head with, the message that I need to see, but I didn't know that I needed. And so I often get, this undiluted Cassey wisdom, at 5:25 a.m. When I'm having coffee before getting my day.
Who needs caffeine when you can have a wallop from the other side of the world?
I know. That's yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I could explore that some more. Craig, thank you so much. I just want to say how much I love and honor both you and how you show up in the world. Thank you for being you with us on this episode of Connection Over Coffee. And thank you for being you, Carrie Bradshaw style, sitting at your laptop, getting rid of the blinking cursor on an empty screen and filling it with just such wisdom. Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all the voice notes to support my Carrie Bradshaw moment. I really enjoyed those too.
Thank you, Craig.